everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and we are going to pick things up right after our encounter in Wild Assent from Lazy Squire Games. This is the finale, which will cover the encampment phase, which is the second major portion of the hunt mode, and will complete the first season. Now, the first thing I want to mention is, as you saw at the end of the last video, Berline was taken down as I missed 1 point of assigned damage that should have hit him, which would have knocked him out, and so for the purposes of the encampment phase, I'm going to continue to keep Berline down. Now, the one thing I do want to clarify is something that was worth noting in the prior video that I actually missed, and I'm going to double check this, but based on the wording in the rulebook, it sounds correct to me. It states here on the scout card that the Phoenix has, on activation, assign 1 damage to all seekers. Now, technically, based on how the rulebook is written, if you begin capturing a particular creature, the second you have that capturing token, that creature no longer activates anymore. So technically, this scout card wouldn't trigger anymore while you've got that thing with some hooks in. So, in other words, not as much damage would have come to my seekers, which means Berline would actually be standing at this point. As I mentioned, though, I'm going to continue to keep him down for the purposes of exploring the encampment phase, and this will give you an idea as to how characters come back up and how they heal and how we move through this. Now, it's worth noting, once you've cleaned up the encounter, to keep the health tracker markers there for your seekers, because you're going to need to reference where they're at health-wise when you're doing some healing during the encampment phase. For me, it worked out perfectly. I could fold the board all the way up, and everyone's health trackers landed in this quadrant, so that works nicely. The very first thing you'll do when you begin the encounter phase is what's called entering into the encampment, and at this point you're going to be focusing on trading captured wild creature cards for captured creature tokens of the appropriate threat, and place the tokens on any available storage slots in your encampment. I'll show you how that works in a moment. If no slots are available for these particular creatures that we've captured, the remaining tokens are just discarded, so you do lose them if you don't have the ability to store those captured creatures. Next, each seeker will automatically receive healing from the barracks. Players return any downed seekers' health trackers to the board. Their current health is equal to the amount of healing the barracks provides. So Berline, in this case being a down seeker, will be coming back up, and everybody else that's currently standing is just going to get a health boost. So knowing that you get this automatic heal when you come back to the encampment lets you know that you can go into a scenario with 4 seekers. 3 of them could be down, 1 could be standing. As long as you've slayed all the creatures or captured all the creatures, you've done your job. You'll bring back all the downed seekers, and you'll be able to get them all back up on their feet again. So right now we take a look at the barracks to see what we're going to be doing here. It says to heal all seekers for 5, 6, or 7, and it's based on the building level, and currently it's level 1. And then we're going to get a boost of 5 health even to the downed character Berline in this case, so he's going to jump back to a 5. Everybody else is going to bump up by 5. So after all that healing, this is where our characters currently stand. We still have to talk about the resolving of creature cards that we've captured and getting some tokens instead for those cards. Let's do that now. So we'll take a look at the creatures we've captured, which I've got standing upright, and we're going to go ahead and take their cards, and in this case I'll just remove the scout card with this one as well. It just happened to be tied for the purposes of my setup, and we're going to remove these health markers as well out of the equation. So these 2 creatures are going to turn into tokens based on their threat level, so threat level 2 token and a threat level 1 token. So just like that, we've resolved the creatures that we brought back from capturing. They are now represented by these tokens which have the threat level on them. We're next going to place them in slots to be held in our encampment. But first, I'm going to go ahead and also deal with the ones we slayed. And you'll also notice that the resources that were below the ones we captured are gone, of course, because, well, we don't get those resources if we bring them back in one piece. But for the ones that we slayed, we will get to keep the resources underneath of them. The rest of this can disappear. And just as easy as that, we now have a representation of our successes from the encounter phase in tokens. So the barracks can hold 1 creature, and over here we have the creature pens, which at level 1 can also hold 1 creature. When it gets upgraded to level 2, it can hold 2 creatures, and then at level 3 it can also hold 2 creatures, but it also is getting a benefit as it goes in terms of how much gold you can sell these captured creatures for, which then that gold can be used to really bolster this encampment overall in terms of building it up. So what I'm going to do is just place 1 one of these in each of them. So I'll go like this. And for now, we'll keep our resources that we've gained nearby. Now let's talk quickly about what happens in the flow of the encounter phase now that we've entered into it. It's going to start with every seeker getting 5 actions to spend. I've gone ahead and used a d6 for each one of the seekers just to represent how many actions they have to spend during the encampment phase. It's worth noting that certain tasks will require more than one seeker or more than one action to complete. Seeker actions must be used sequentially, and all seekers use their first action and then use their second. However, you may find that there's certain actions that cost 2, so in a given round, you may choose a seeker to do something that costs 2, dropping from 5 down to 3, and you're essentially locking them in for 2 rounds worth of spent actions already in advance. This is where the dice, I find, can be nice to keep track of that. If the encampment simply does not have a particular building built yet to level 1, then you aren't able to take advantage of any of the great abilities that that building may have for you during the encampment phase. So for instance, everyone has the barracks unlocked at level number 1 when you first head to your encampment phase. So you're always going to have that, but based on your selections from the very beginning of your campaign, you'll have 2 other buildings at level 1, and that's going to be up to you to decide what those are. For me, on the left-hand side of the barracks, I chose to build the workshop, so I have access to actions there. And on the far right-hand side, I have the creature pens, and I have actions I can do there. However, I cannot do any actions currently at the temple or at the Seeker's Den until I pay to actually get those buildings built. So we'll talk more about how that works later on. For now, let's dig into the actions. Let's first talk about the actions that I can't do, and that's going to start with the temple here. Now, if I had the temple at level number 1, seekers can spend 1 action to heal at the temple. The amount of healing depends on the building level, of course, as we saw earlier. So this can definitely be the spot to get your seekers back up the charts. The Seeker's Den is the final building that I currently don't have built. If I did, I would have the ability as an action to try and hunt there for small prey to earn resources beyond the resources that I gained by slaying creatures during the encounter. So this is a good way to get additional resources towards building things or crafting things. Now, the maximum number of seekers that can go out on a hunt is dependent on the level of the building. So right now, for me, I can't even do this, as I mentioned, but if it was a level 1, as stated down here, access to hunting is for 2, 3, or 4 seekers, depending on level 1, 2, 3 of that building. So if I had it up to a level 1, I could take 2 seekers out on a hunt. Each of the seekers that went on that hunt would have to spend 1 action each in order to do so, and we would start rolling an attack die for each of the seekers that went out on the hunt. And based on the roll, we would gather particular resources. So the more seekers you bring on a hunt, the better your results. So you'll roll your 1 attack die, and then you'll draw random resources based on the roll and the number of seekers, 2, 3, or 4. So in my case, if I happen to have a level 1 building for the Seeker's Den, then I'd be going in with 2 seekers, so I would have a value of 2, and then I would roll my die, and based on my die result, I may add to the number of resources I can potentially grab. If you roll a blank, you get 0, 1, or 1 resource, so that would just be a total of 2, as I went in with 2 seekers and got a blank. If it happened to be an attack result, it would be drawing 1, 1, or 2, so the 1 at the very beginning would add into the 2 seekers that I have, so it would be 3 draws there. The 2 die examples that I just gave in terms of being an attack result or a blank result, when you total those up to start pulling resources, they're drawn randomly. So they're good, they're going to give you resources, but they may not be the exact ones you want. So how do you get the ones you want? Well, if you roll a special, then you're able to pick the resource you want. Now, how does that work? Essentially, if I went in with 2 seekers with a level 1 building and I rolled a special, I would be adding a 1, 1, 2 to my seekers, which again, because my building is level 1, I only care about the first number there, so it'd be 1 added on top of my 2 seekers, so that's a total of 3. So out of the 3 resources I'm gaining, 1 of them can be chosen by me specifically, and the other 2 are drawn randomly. The key thing to remember about hunting is you can only do this once per encampment phase. So to sum up what I just spoke about, the healing at the temple, or the crafting at the workshop, or hunting at the Seeker's Den, those are the 3 actions where you need and require to have that specific building built at least at level 1 in order to gain those different actions of choice. Now, as of right now, for me, the only one of those 3 that I actually have access to is crafting at the workshop. So let's now talk about the actions you can do that don't have any building requirements. The one action that you always have available to you is to visit the markets, and you can travel to the markets, but you need to have 2 seekers spend 3 actions each. But this then grants them access to a number of tasks at no further cost. And these free tasks can be performed in any order. You can sell creatures first to earn enough gold to purchase workers and or building materials. So it really opens up a number of things by going to the market. So for us, we potentially may want to do this. By going to the market, it would allow us to sell the threat level 1 and threat level 2 creatures that we've gained in order to get gold for them. And it's as simple as discarding the token and gaining the number of gold that's equal to the threat level on the token. So at best here, 3 gold. The next available action is to hire workers. We have a blacksmith here already from the beginning of the campaign. Now we can take advantage of its passive ability, as well as potentially using resources to craft towards building a heavy shield if we so choose, thanks to having the workshop, which is a requirement to pull this off. The other thing that's happening with this action is not interacting with this card specifically, although it's worth noting what it can do for us. It's around hiring more workers. So right now we have access to, based on our barracks being level 1, 3 worker slots, as you can see on screen. If we bump up to a level 2 barracks, we'll have access to 4 slots on this row. And if we get to a level 3 barracks, we have all 6 slots available. And that's really going to open up the doors for us to bring more workers in as the seasons go along. Now, unlike selling creatures, where you can sell as many creatures that you have in order to get as much gold as you can potentially get, in this situation, you can only hire workers once per visit to the markets. And players draw 3 worker cards, or in my case, player, and we can hire up to 2 of them. Workers always cost at least 1 gold and sometimes more. Another action we could do at the market is bartering there, and we are able to trade resources we have for equipment at the markets. We draw 3 equipment cards to see what's available, and just like hiring workers, this may only be performed once per trip, and players can pay the barter cost to receive the equipment cards. So as an example, here's an equipment card, and you've got the barter cost down in the bottom right in terms of the resources that would need to be traded in order to gain that equipment card. Another free action that the Seekers can do is purchase new buildings to add to their encampment. So each building is going to cost 2 gold. Place a building token with the Roman numeral 1 facing up to show the building is now part of the encampment, and the building can be used and its effects immediately after building it. The final free action you can do when you're at the market is to upgrade a building, of course, and Seekers may upgrade an existing building by paying the appropriate gold cost. Upgrading from building level 1 to 2 costs 2 gold, and upgrading from 2 to 3 costs 3 gold. You just simply flip and replace the building token so that the correct Roman numeral is facing the building's new level, and then you just need to reference that with the different actions you'd like to take in terms of how it changes. And of course, these are all going to give you positives. Now, outside of visiting the market, there is still another action you can do that doesn't require a building in order to do it, and that is scouting. So 2 seekers venture into the wilds in search of dangerous and valuable creatures to hunt. The players draw 2 cards from the scouting deck, or more depending on the buildings and workers. In other words, you may have buildings that boost this ability. For instance, if you happen to have the Seeker's Den, as it mentions here in the bottom right, your scouting results can be a +1 in terms, or +2 in terms of how many extra scouting cards you get to grab when you're doing this scouting. The one thing to note is that it's going to cost you 2 actions per seeker, and it ends the encampment phase to begin a new encounter phase once you do it. So you really want to leave that to the very end. The last thing I want to talk about before we actually start spending our actions on all these different options is around derelict encampments. And really how this is going to work out is if you burn all of your actions and don't do that final one I just talked about, which is scouting, then you're going to go into a derelict setup with your encampment, which basically has negatives that you can get out of, but they still could have impacts, negative impacts on your encampment and its overall health. But we'll talk about a lot of that at the end. Now let's dive into actually spending all the actions for our seekers, and then we'll touch on that at the very end of the video. All right, so we got 5 actions to spend each. We want to keep in mind we want to scout at the very end, and we need to have 2 actions remaining with 2 seekers to pull that off, so I'll keep that in mind. For now, looking at Zaxxas and Ilithenia with the highest HP currently on the tracks, I'm going to use them to spend 3 actions, which seems like a whole bunch, but this is now going to open up the ability for me to do as much as I want at the market, because these are now all free actions, and I can do this as all of those different actions, whatever order I choose, and then once I start spending actions again with my seekers, then I'll keep depleting from there. So I've spent the cost, now I have the availability to start taking free actions inside the market, and I've got some selling to do based on the captured creatures we have. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cash in both of these creatures here for gold, 3 gold total. And now with that 3 gold, we have options at the market. I'm going to go ahead and spend 2 of my gold to purchase the temple and the seeker's den at level 1 each. That's pretty awesome because now I have the ability to do some healing at the temple, and the seeker's den is going to give me boosts when I do some scouting, as well as access to hunting if I so choose. I have a single gold remaining, and I'm actually going to use it to try and hire a worker. So we're going to go to the worker deck right now and draw 3 cards off the top, and we'll see who we can hire. So we got a sentry, we have a trader, and we have a weaponsmith. Let's go over the 3 different cards and try to decide which one we want to hire. We have a trader here, and it has a passive ability barter, so draw 5 equipment cards instead of 3 when trading at the markets. When purchasing equipment, choose 1 required resource. That resource is no longer required. That's actually a really good card. Sentry here is an armed escort, so traveling to the markets requires 1 fewer seekers. That's actually really awesome because as of right now, I needed to commit 2 just to be able to pay the cost to get to the markets, whereas a sentry would drop that down. That's really handy in the long run. Weaponsmith has a passive whetstone. Apply whetstone to the seeker at the beginning of each encounter. That seeker has a +1 attack die for the rest of the encounter, and we could potentially build a warhammer. I've chosen to go with the sentry because I believe being able to save on actions spent is going to be huge in the long run. Just to go over quickly all the other free actions I could potentially do, I've already sold creatures, so I'm done there. I've just hired workers. I could barter at the market, but I won't be doing that this time because I don't have a ton of resources just yet. Purchase a building, we've already gone ahead and done that, and upgrading a building, I ran out of money, and of course to go to a level 2 of any of these buildings would cost 2 gold, so the second I bought 2 buildings starting at level 1 each. I had already capped myself and wasn't able to upgrade to a level 2 anyway, but that's okay because I wanted to get all these buildings up off the ground and be able to have their basic positive abilities. Now, what's really cool about purchasing new buildings is abilities are instantly impacted in terms of what I have available to me. So you can see here, especially for the temple here at level 1, it's going to open up some things for Burline. And we also now have a seeker's den as well. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock all the abilities based on the building changes we've had. So that made an immediate impact here. We have Daughter of the Winds. Fani now has a +1 range, and Sidestep has a +1 attack die now. Down here we have Pierce. Her attacks damage her target and an adjacent enemy on the field behind it in relation to her. We have Holy Mist that's opened up for Burline, so on each special he gets to heal himself for 2. That would be super handy going forward. And then over here, Zaxxas actually didn't have any change whatsoever. The next thing that I really want to do is I want to hunt. So we're going to go ahead and spend an action with each of the 2 seekers that haven't gone yet, dropping them down to 4 in order to roll an attack die to go on a hunt. So now it's time to determine how successful our hunt is going to be. We know we're going in with 2 seekers, which means we're guaranteed 2 random draws of the resources, and rolling this attack die right now is going to, in this case with 2 seekers, a blank will give us nothing additional. This right here will give us an additional random draw, and then if we get a special, we get to pick which resource we get, which could be very useful. And I'm keeping my eye on the blacksmith as he has the ability to create a heavy shield. I need 2 horns and 2 eyes, so I need to work towards that, or I'd like to work towards that. Let's roll the die and see how we do. We got ourselves 1 more random draw, so a total of 3 for this hunt. I've got all the resources in a bag. I'm going to select one at random here. We're going to pull, and we've got ourselves another eye. That's actually one of the things we need. We need 2 horns. Highly unlikely we'll get both horns here. Let's pull another one. We got ourselves some blood. And finally, the last one is going to be a horn. So we're actually closer than I thought, but just shy. And just like that, we resolved a hunt within the encampment phase, able to gather more resources than we did even during the encounter. So remember, we can only do this 1 time inside of an encampment phase. So that's going to be it. But you can see you can gather quite a bit of resources. And again, later in the game, when the level of the building is higher, you're going to be able to bring more seekers on your hunt, which means more resources going to that pool. We have now completed a full round of actions during our encampment phase. There is 1 free action you can do at the market, and it's worth understanding how this is set up. It's called bartering. And when you're bartering at the market, it's going to allow you access to a separate pool of cards that still comes from the same pool of cards for equipment. So in other words, when you flip over your deck, you may have all this stuff mixed together as the backs are the same, but there's a very important difference here. Down in the bottom right-hand corner in front of the resources on some of the items, there will be a market cart, and you're going to want to make sure you split those items out, because those are the items you'd be drawing from when you draw 3 to determine which of the 3 at the market you're going to barter in order to gain just by giving resources away to obtain a certain item. So rather than crafting it, for instance, you're going to go ahead and try to actually exchange resources to gain them. You're going to want to make sure this is split out so that you can easily pull from this deck. So going into the next round of actions here, we already know that these ones are locked in for market, and we're happy with the free actions the market provides at this point. We've done everything I believe I want to do there. We now have some actions here to spend with Burline and Fawny, so I'm going to go ahead and actually spend a number of them to really boost up their health over a series of rounds. So Fawny and Burline have gone ahead and used an action, dropping them both down to 3 in order to go to the temple. The temple at max can have 2 occupants right now based on its current level of 1. So both of them are going to heal, and when we're there, it says heal a seeker for 2 health per action. So we're doing that for sure. Burline's going to jump from a 5 to a 7, and Fawny's going to jump from a 10 to a 12. That round of actions is complete. I'm now going to go ahead and go through another round of actions here for Burline and Fawny in order to bring them up by 2 health apiece again. So Burline is going to jump up to 9, and Fawny's going to jump up to 14. I'm sure that a lot of you remember the very beginning of the video where I said that 2 seekers need to have 2 actions in order to ensure we can go scouting, to then start an encounter, to ensure that our encampment doesn't become derelict. I will talk about the cons of letting it go derelict, as well as some of the pros for a strategy as to why you'd want to do this. But for right now, we're going to just pick a couple seekers here in order to keep 2 actions apiece, and we're going to use the other 2 to just continue healing. I'm going to go ahead and have my 2 lowest HP characters right now go ahead into the temple to heal up by 2, so Zaxxas and Burline. Zaxxas is going to move up to 13, Burline's going to move up to 11. It's certainly worth noting for Burline that I want to get his health up because, well, he's the lowest HP character of the entire group, but he also does have the ability right now to go ahead and heal himself for 2. Now, if I had focused my gold instead of buying the 2 buildings that I did, and I had leveled up for 2 gold from a level 1 to a level 2 tier temple, I would have unlocked this Phoenix Fire ability, which allows me to heal an ally within range 4. So there are other ways to get healing going in your group beyond just the barracks when you first enter the encampment phase, going to the temple. There's also consumables, like you can actually get items from the market that can then heal you. So there's a number of different ways to look into boosting up your health, but Burline, I really want to get that 2nd tier on the temple because then he can start helping his group inside of these encounters. The only downside is healing and dealing with creatures is a pretty tough job. So I'm going to have Fani and Ilithenia. They're going to use both of their last 2 actions here a piece in order to make sure at the very end we do some scouting. So that leaves Zaxis and Berline, who are going to go ahead into the temple again to heal for 2 each. So that will put Zaxis up here at 15 with Ilithenia, and this is going to have Berline head to 13. The final thing I'm doing to end the encampment phase, as the second you do the scouting option, the encampment phase ends. So I left it right to the very end. We're going to draw 2 cards from this deck to determine where we're going for our next encounter. And the other thing we get as a benefit, because we have a level 1 Seeker's Den, is we get an additional card on top of the 2 we already get. So 3 in total, and we can choose from one of them. So we're going to go ahead here. We got Burden as one, a Crisis as another, and the Grove of Knives. Out of the 3 options, and after reading what would happen in each of them based on which creatures would be involved and the passive abilities on the cards that are going to be potentially a good thing or bad thing, we've got this one here, Critter Crisis in the middle, says slay the Wildwood Widow to receive the Vial of Venom. That sounds like a really good benefit, so I'm going to go after that middle one. Once all the Seekers have used their actions, a new season begins. We now move the season marker from 1 to 2. Now, at the beginning of seasons 3, 5, 8, and 10, the Scout deck is going to be modified and shuffled. As you know, the Scout deck right now is just threat 1s all the way through in terms of the different locations. But when we hit season 3, which is not right now, we're inside of season 2, but once we get to 3 in the future, we're going to add all threat 2 Scout cards into the mix. It's really going to shake things up and make things progressively more difficult. Season 5, we remove the threat 1 Scout cards, so now we're officially at threat 2 by that point in the deck. Season 8, we add the threat 3 Scout cards, and then in season 10, we remove all the threat 2 Scout cards. You can see the deck is constantly just moving along with you as the seasons progress, getting tougher and tougher. The final thing to mention in terms of wrapping up my walkthrough of the encampment phase for my season number 1 transition into season number 2 is renown. So as the Seekers survive more seasons, their renown grows, resulting in various rewards. Players collect the rewards at the end of these seasons. Season 3, you're going to gain 1 gold. Season 5, 1 gold and 1 randomly drawn worker. And season 8, you get 2 gold. And that's it. That's going to wrap up the flow of this encampment phase. Now, the one thing I didn't cover in this, because again, I planned to ensure I had at least 2 actions with 2 Seekers to do a scouting action at the very, very end. But if you don't do that, you go into what's called a derelict state with your encampment, and I'm going to walk you through what that means. This section of the rulebook completely covers the derelict encampments and how that happens. So as it states right at the very beginning, and I've mentioned throughout, if the Seekers did not use their final actions to scout, which I did, then you've gone ahead at that point and it's considered to be a derelict encampment, and a new encampment phase begins right from scratch again. Scouting in the new season will remove the derelict status. If the Seekers do not scout for 2 seasons, though, the encampment ends up being attacked. So you can't linger in your encampment over and over in this endless loop without some kind of punishment. And you can see that punishment comes in the form of shuffling the Scout cards as if the next season threshold had been reached already. So in seasons 5 to 7, you would act as if season 8 had hit and you'd be adding threats in earlier, because basically you're not keeping the wild at bay, so it's getting closer to you. And as you can see right at the bottom, it says to draw 1 Scout card and initiate the encounter. So absolutely no choice in that particular situation. And it states in the price of this derelict state that if the Seeker survive the encounter, their encampment is no longer derelict, but they must draw from the encounter deck twice to assess damage that actually comes to their encampment. The first draw determines whether a worker was slain or a building was damaged, and that'll determine based on that encounter deck pull. And then there's another pull here that determines the worker or building that's actually affected. So for workers, there are 6 worker slots. Imagine them numbered 1 through 6 in the encounter deck, and that's the worker that's going to be lost. Of course, if you pull one that's empty, you don't lose anything, you just get really lucky. Any tokens on a destroyed building, of course, are going to be lost, and if the encampment does not have that building, then you're lucky again. So it's interesting. There's definitely a strategy to potentially going ahead and pushing the encampment phase again through another full round of actions, giving you the ability to maybe heal up some more. But again, there's costs to that. You're going to have to weigh that option heavily. Now, at this point, you have seen a full encounter, you've seen the full encampment phase, and putting these together, as you know, is a full season. You're going to try to survive 10 of them in order to make it all the way to the end of the game. This is the final snippet in the rulebook around the final encounter and how to make sure you've set that up correctly. But if you make it to the 10th season and you take down everything in there, you have won the hunt mode of Wild Assent. The final thing worth noting is that there might be some passive abilities on the workers that you have in your encampment. You're going to make sure that you do not forget these bonuses. For instance, here the blacksmith allows me to apply polish to a seeker at the beginning of each encounter. So you may have a bunch of workers that give you some really good tokens or abilities that you can use during your encounter phase. Don't forget about those. They're going to boost you up, and you're going to need that help in order to survive out there. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up this entire look at Wild Assent from Lazy Squire Games. Really hope this helps you get a grasp on the encampment phase. Of course, you haven't seen everything in action during this video, as of course that is going to work its way through as you play through the seasons in the game. I wish you all the best when you're out there in the wild trying to survive. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.